But there's multiple aspects of what happened. There was the rollback on the Dodd-Frank requirements for a bank this size that took place in 2018. There was the subsequent execution of that essentially rollback by the Fed, which is responsible for regulating banks. There was the bank itself taking risks that weren't caught by regulators because they escaped that threshold. And then there was depositors who were putting a tremendous amount of money in this bank beyond the FDIC limits of insurance without what they call, I guess it's cash sweeps. It's basically an instrument in which, you can hire somebody to distribute your money in a way that it's all federally insured across different banking situations or different accounts. And that didn't happen. And those are the people that we, as a society, not necessarily our tax dollars, but I think we're probably splitting hairs here. We are bailing out these depositors, and people can make an argument as to whether or not we should do that at one point. But clearly, they were, for some reason, ignoring the limits to FDIC insurance, which goes up to $250,000. If you have $250,000 in a bank and the bank collapses, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation will make you whole from fees it has pulled from banks. It has essentially a fund. But if you put $260,000 in the bank, that last $10,000 for normal people, you're out of luck. And so people who have that kind of money usually know not to do this. But here we find out, and I speculated on this yesterday, and here Andrew Ross Sorkin, somewhat confirms that that's what was going on in this bank.
Very grateful for the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and FDIC for stepping in.
Pause it. We should just make it clear. This is Hemant Taneja, who is the CEO of General Catalyst. I don't know what any of those things are, but go ahead.
Very grateful for the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, and FDIC for stepping in. I think backstopping the deposits has gone a long way.
A lot of times SVB would offer loans that were unavailable elsewhere. They would offer mortgages personally. I'm not just talking about mortgages for the businesses, but mortgages personally for some of the leaders of these businesses at rates that were much more attractive, in part because they were keeping their business deposits there. In some cases, SVB said that they would give you certain loan rates if you kept all of your money there, as opposed to having even any money elsewhere. Do you think that there should be? Now, I don't know how this is legal. You're going to give me a personal mortgage, like a super favorable personal mortgage, if I keep all my business funds in your bank. That's a kickback. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe it's...
This is widely done, as you say, though, Sam. That's the thing. There's an understanding that this happens regularly with wealthy investors and people putting money into banks. And they're getting favorable. I mean, the point is they're assuming the risk. They're getting some benefit because they're taking this risk. What if this bank goes under? Well, the bank won't go under, but so I continue.
In some cases, SVB said that they would give you certain loan rates if you kept all of your money there, as opposed to having even any money elsewhere. Do you think that there should be rules against that?
Yes.
Look, I think those offerings actually were made it really easy for these companies to do business. And it was... I would say I don't think it needs regulation against it. If there was diversification, this really would have been fine. And I look back in hindsight, I think about how is it that, we were so comfortable with just having, a single option for these companies. I think once we move past diversification, this issue should go away from my standpoint.
We know that it made it easier for you guys to do business. That's not what we're talking
Should be
about
smarter
right
next
now.
time.
Hey, I mean,
That actually was the problem.
that's the issue, right? You've correctly identified the problem, CEO there, and I hope they enjoy that lack of free market in this instance here, where the government stepped in, saved the free market from itself, saved these depositors. I hope that this causes them to have a complete abandonment of a libertarian free market capitalist ideology, but somehow I doubt it.
I mean, he's basically saying, I think we learned our lesson. You can trust us. We didn't get why that was such a bad idea, and now we get it.
No, we lost money on a big bet. That should be enough of a lesson for us. And
they didn't lose money?
Well, if they are an investor, they might.
They're an investor in the bank, maybe.
Right.
But we're talking about the depositors, and they're not going to learn anything. Now, if these people were not people who had hundreds of thousands of dollars available to put into the bank, what we would hear about for now until eternity is moral hazard. It's a moral hazard to save these people who knowingly took this big of a risk. And now that may be the case, or maybe it's not. But the point is that people should be aware there are two different standards going on here. And it's in part because Silicon Valley is so keyed into things like social media, honestly, that they could make it seem like if those depositors aren't made whole, then you're only going to have three options as to which gig economy outfit is going to deliver your food.
Hey, this bank bailout is not fair to the banks before it that didn't get bailed out and had to work really hard. Oh, wait, are there any banks that didn't get bailed out
Well,
before?
this may not be fair to depositors in the past who had over $250,000 in the
I understand, but it's
account.
just like, look at how the student debt framing is completely not applied to these wealthy people.
These industries, like, the way that they talk about this stuff, the reporters, the talking heads on TV, they all use a vernacular. And to be fair, like the legal industry does this, like all these industries do this as a way of sort of like making things less opaque or more opaque.
They seem more complicated, sophisticated. There's a way to kind of keep the masses out from understanding.
Indeed. And like, just like this bank was aggressive in courting client. Aggressive? What do you mean aggressive? Like, I'm aggressive.
Yeah.
But I'm not doing stuff that is going to create a significant amount of risk that then I'm going to say, like, we've got so much risk, the U.S. government has to step in and do something to save us.
I guess you could call greed and like towing a legal boundary aggressive.
You can get arrested or charged for taking out $999,000 cash out of your bank account if there is any evidence that you are doing this to avoid scrutiny from the IRS. If you take 10 grand out of your bank account, the IRS and the Treasury, somebody gets notified. That's the way they got Rush Limbaugh on his Oxy problem. That's the way they got Elliot Spitzer on his prostitution problem. And why don't we have that when it comes to something that is so systemic that the U.S. government has to come in, and that we've spent 4 days wondering if the economy is going down the tubes? We also didn't even get to the point where, like, with Alexander, and maybe we'll speak to someone else. Maybe we'll get somebody also who can sort of like talk to sort of the even broader issues here. But today, as folks, as longtime listeners will know, or viewers, I listen to normie radio in the morning. I listen to some music, and they have AP News at the bottom and the top of the hour. And on the AP News, I heard today an interview with somebody, some financial, talking head or whatever, talking about how the Fed might ease on rates because worries about the stability of the banking industry. Now, understand that that Powell himself has said, we're going out there and we're doing this because we need to kick more people out of work. That's paraphrased, but pretty spot on of a paraphrase.
Yeah.
And I know people know what the dual mandate of the Fed is because we mentioned it on this program, but here's how it was articulated on this interview. The guy says the Fed has a dual mandate. One is to keep inflation in check, create price stability, and then the other mandate is to maintain stability in our financial sector. And that is, in fact, not the dual mandate, that the statutory dual mandate the Fed has. The other is to have the highest rate of employment possible and balance that out with the inflation mandate. But for some reason, all of a sudden, the Fed is thinking about pumping the brakes because of the impact on the banks. But here's what's really so just messed up about this. And frankly, I'm glad whatever slows the rate increases is good in my mind. But, if the banks go under, they'll get their unemployment, right? If a couple of banks go under, they'll get their unemployment. It's just that it's not necessarily in the sector that they want it to be in. And this is what is really serious, just no greater evidence than, the absolute bullcrap that is involved in some of this sort of classical economics and these Larry Summers, Jerome Powell, these exhortations that, inflation is hurting working people. If you were worried about inflation hurting working people, you'd go in and you'd say, you know what? What is the real main cause of this that we can impact? Now, from the Fed's perspective, they only have one tool, but that doesn't mean that they have to use it. Just because the only thing you have is a hammer doesn't mean that when you see a screw, that you should take the hammer to it. Maybe you start saying, we need some type of fiscal fix for this, which means, or statutory, which means we're going to have broader rent control, or we're going to have a massive building program for government housing. Because housing is one of the biggest hits that people are taking right now. But you never hear that. You never hear Larry Summers come out and say, really, what we really need to do is build more houses, build more apartments, deal with the zoning issues.
Yeah.
He just says we need to have a couple more million people out of work. And then he looks around and he says, hopefully it won't be at this resort I'm staying at because I need my pina colada.
His initial reaction to the SVB collapse was that there's so much fog of war surrounding the situation. I mean, it's very nuanced, right? And then months before, he was saying how student debt cancellation would be catastrophic for the country. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I mean, they think of themselves so highly. So much fog of war. What are you, in the middle of World War II, dude? This is the greed coming home to roost. There's not much complex about it. And I want to make this part clear is that we can go and talk about more solutions for all of these distinct different problems, right? But the important thing to take away from this moment is they are talking out of both sides of their mouth. When they talk about student loans, like Emma says, and they say creates a moral hazard, and these people knew what they were getting into, and it would be unfair to the people who came before them. Every single one of those things you could say about what's happening with this bailout from the Silicon Valley Bank of the depositors. Now there may be an argument that you need to do this because we need that fourth delivery, that fourth app that allows us to get our food delivered. If you want to make that argument, make that argument. But the point is that the legitimacy and the moral arguments,
Because there have been FDI, there's been people who've had over $250,000 in a bank closed by FDC who had to take a haircut on that. And there have been people who were, subjected to regulation. I mean, on and on and on. The moral hazard here, there's no better example of moral hazard. If you were a economics professor and you wanted to teach moral hazard, this would be the perfect example that you would use.
Yeah, not just, other teaching, just regular Joe's fiscal responsibility. This would be a way to discipline. This would be your example. Well, the venture capitalists who are trying to take as much risk as humanly possible and have these close relationships with these kinds of banks, so they're trying to avoid regulation, as there's just not enough liquidity sloshing around in here. That's the bank, but I'm talking about the depositors. The threshold is $250K. Right.
Here it is, $250K right here. Oh, sorry. $250K. And they had their money was like all through the roof here. And they all knew the threshold was $250K.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
And they go in and they say, we're getting all sorts of benefit from this. I'm getting toasters. And by toasters, they're not really getting toasters.
Right.
They're getting 0% mortgages, 1% mortgages, 2% mortgages. If you get a 2% mortgage right now, you are making money, because the money that you borrow and not spend, you can go take that and put that in a money market and make 3%, or put it in a CD and make 4% in some instances. You're literally making money off of that. And the bank would give them this in return for the risk associated with having money over the 250 threshold. That was the bet that they were making. And they lost the bet. But the government's going to come in and make sure that they don't lose the bet. That's what people say with moral hazard you're creating. Now, the difference is between student loan forgiveness and this instance is that this is a better case of creating moral hazard, because if I get $10,000 off my student loan, I'm not going to go, you know what? I'm going to take another loan and go to college again. That's not going to happen. But these people, when they get the opportunity to get another 0% mortgage or 1% business loan or whatever it is, they're going to take it. And make no doubt about it, they're going to do it again if they have the opportunity, because they're getting all their money back and they got to put it somewhere. And I guarantee you, I don't know what percentage of that cohort of people, some percentage will go like, oh, I learned my lesson, I'm going to get the sweeps. That was scary. But there'll be another percentage that says, I learned my lesson. We made off like bandits.
There'll be a new crop of clients.
Yeah, who's that?
I want some of that.
Former percentage, probably much smaller, single digits versus double.
Yep. All right, we're going to take a quick break.
Sorry, one more thing on that. We need central planning in this country. My entire adult life, we've been flooding the zone with cheap cash so these idiots can go around and try to make the next Google or whatever the hell, and then doing nothing. And we've and you look at China, the high-speed rail they've done, and the amount of we can barely move the ball forward on anything that's actually productive and would actually be a good investment. And it's because we've given it over to, psychos that are just seeking profit.
This is I happen to think that within a very different, that you can have the existence of capitalism in a country. I mean, I think there's an argument that China is at least partially capitalist.
Right, but they have a lot of central planning.
They have a lot of central planning. The endeavors that people pursue in the private sector in this country have their primary function is for profit. Almost they have a fiduciary responsibility in some instances, have it only for profit. I mean, this came up during Katrina. We privatized parts of FEMA. There were buses that were waiting an hour or two from New Orleans. And a contractor had subcontracted out the buses. And because profit was the number one motive for all of these people, those buses stayed there because they didn't want to deploy those buses and find out we don't need them. But by the time that they knew they needed them, it was too late. And that's why you don't get high-speed rail in this country. That's why you get a tax on the post office.
Right. The thing.
You don't get public transportation in this country. Yeah. You don't get a high-speed internet in every home, fiber in every home. The reason why you don't get that is because it's not profitable for the private industry to do so. And on top of that, we'll go further. You don't get the level of safety that you could with freight rail. You don't get the level of consistency and safety that you do with our grid. Like, you don't have, you have people dying in Texas. You'll have people dying, in the snowstorms. Power will go out. Worcester will probably lose power for a week. You don't get these things because it's not profitable. And we as a society decide, like, okay, well, if it's not profitable, then we shouldn't have them. There's another decision to be made. There's another choice. The other choice is, no, we as a society want this. We want high-speed rail. We want better public transportation. We want a grid that we can rely on. We want people not to die because it's too hot or too cold and we don't have the grid to deal with it. I mean, putting aside for a moment climate change. And then you can go further. Like, we want more public transportation because we want to save the planet. We want more, better energy because we want to save the planet. I mean, you can go on with these things. We want high-speed internet because it's going to allow people more freedom and as to where they live. And we could choose that as a society. But This is also just a reminder, the same society that said, we cut child poverty by 35%, 45%. That was fun.
It works.
Well, let's stop.
We're
going to stop now.
You know what, like, in the macro drives the inflation of prices is the fact that we've privatized essentially everything. So the markets control all sectors of society, including housing, since the Fair Cloth Amendment has prevented federal investment in public housing for the past few decades. And just go down the list. When you privatize everything and you leave it to the markets, there's no element of price control to ensure that there's affordable access to these human needs that should be provided by the state.